All right, welcome back to the deep dive. So you want to know what this whole second term thing means for Trump, right?
Uh-huh.
It's pretty wild. A second term, but not right after the first one. Never happened before in U.S. history. And we've got a whole pile of sources to dig into, social media, news articles, the whole 9 yards to figure this thing out.
No,
So this isn't like any other election. It's more like, well, a comeback story. What does that say about America right now?
well, it's definitely got everyone talking. This election was a close one, had everyone on the edge of their seats, and the whole world was watching. And let me tell you, there are going to be repercussions. We'll break it all down for you, though don't worry. We'll look at the immediate stuff, the long-term historical context. By the end of this deep dive, you'll have a much better idea of what's going on.
Sounds good. Okay, first things first. Let's look at the election results. Trump won with 51% of the popular vote, 277 electoral votes to Harris's 47.5% and 224 electoral votes.
Yeah.
Seems pretty clear cut, but it wasn't a walk in the park. A lot of
Mm.
key states were decided by a hair's breadth.
Absolutely. Those swing states were like battlegrounds. They could have gone either way.
Yeah.
And, you can really see how intense this campaign was, just about how close those results were. It wasn't just a landslide. It was a real fight for every vote.
Right. And right after winning, Trump's Instagram is all America's comeback starts right now. That's
Yeah.
quite a statement. What's this comeback narrative all about?
Right. Well, it's interesting because this comeback thing, it really goes all the way back to his campaign speeches and what he was putting out online. There's this consistent message about making America great again, but now it's also about fixing what some people think went wrong.
So what does that tell us about what he's planning to do, his agenda, basically?
Okay, well, as we look at what he's been saying, he's been really focused on a few things: the economy, immigration, and national security. Seems like those are the main things he wants to tackle.
Yep.
Makes sense. Now, this next one, it's a little bit touchy. At the Israeli-American Council National Summit, Trump said Israel would be, how did he put it? Eradicated in 2 years if he hadn't won the election. Pretty strong words. What could this mean for how the U.S. deals with the Middle East?
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty intense, to say the least.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to be careful about reading too much into what people say during campaigns,
Yeah.
versus what they actually end up doing once they're in office.
Right, right.
But you can't ignore something like that. It could mean there's a shift happening in how the U.S. and Israel work together, maybe a more forceful approach in the region. It's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit here. I know a lot of people are wondering about what this second term could mean for the economy. Our sources mention things like tax cuts and spending on infrastructure. What's the overall picture here?
Well, we have to look at where the U.S. economy is right now. It's had its ups and downs, to put it mildly. So it's kind of a complicated situation.
That's one way to put it.
Right. But seriously, when it comes to tax cuts, they could help the economy grow in the short term.
But there are worries about what it could do in the long run, like to the national debt. And then there's infrastructure spending, which often creates jobs. That can be a good thing, but it has to be done right. Otherwise, it's just a waste of money. So, it's not a simple yes or no kind of thing.
Benefits and risks, huh? And that brings us to another thing that's been on people's minds: this whole political and social divide. I mean, this election was close, and let's be honest, Trump is a divisive figure.
Exactly. And you're right. Some of the news articles we're looking at, they're worried about how this could make things worse. There's this feeling of mistrust, people questioning whether they can trust the media anymore. Some people are feeling really uneasy about it all.
Yeah, that's definitely something we need to pay attention to. And it just goes to show how important it is to think critically and to get your information from a variety of different sources. Especially now, we have to be careful about what we're reading and listening to and how we're processing it all. Absolutely. I mean, with so much information flying around these days, being able to filter through it all, that's so crucial.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground already, but there's still so much more to unpack. We'll be back in a jiffy to keep digging into what this second term could mean for everyone. All right, we're back, and now we're going to try and get even deeper into this whole second term thing. I mean, we've been talking big picture, but let's get down to brass tacks here. What could the second term actually mean for, everyday people? How will this impact their lives?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? And I think a lot of folks are wondering the same thing. The thing is, it really depends on a whole bunch of factors. Everyone's situation is different. Their job, their finances, their beliefs, it all plays a role.
So no easy answers, huh? Everyone will experience this differently.
Exactly. But, we could look at some areas where people might feel the impact the most. Take healthcare, for example. Any changes to healthcare policy, well, that could have a huge impact on whether people can even afford to see a doctor.
Yeah, for sure. Healthcare is a big deal for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And then you've got education. Trump's talked about supporting things like school choice and vouchers. That could end up changing how public schools are funded and who gets access to them.
Right, right. And what about the environment? I mean, Trump's stance on climate change has been, well, let's just say not everyone agrees with him on that. What could his policies mean for the environment? Like regulations, conservation efforts, all that stuff.
Yeah, that's another big one. And we can't forget about immigration policy and changes to the criminal justice system. Those are areas where people's lives could be directly affected by what happens next. The main thing is to stay informed. Pay attention to how these policies are actually put into practice, and think about what the consequences might be.
Sounds like we're in for some interesting times. Challenges and opportunities, right? It's all going to depend on how things shake out.
I think that's a good way to put it. Yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty, but there's also a chance for things to get better. It all comes down to how things play out and how people get involved in the process.
Okay, so we've talked about the election results, what this could mean for policy, and the whole social and political landscape. Anything else we should be thinking about as we try to wrap our heads around this second term?
Well, something that's really fascinating to me is the long-term impact on American democracy itself.
Whoa, that's a big one. What do you mean by that?
Well, in recent years, there's been this trend of, I don't know, people becoming more and more divided and less trust in the government and institutions. And this election, I mean, regardless of who won, it's really poured gasoline on that fire.
So what can we do to make our democracy stronger, even with all these challenges?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's a question everyone needs to be asking, no matter what side of the political fence they're on. And finding the answer, well, that's not going to be easy.
No, it's not. But it's a conversation we need to have, and it's something we all have a responsibility to work on. I mean, the future of American democracy might depend on it.
It really might.
Yeah.
It goes beyond just politics. It's about the core of our society.
It's interesting to think about how these economic policies could affect things globally. I mean, the U.S. economy is connected to the rest of the world, right? It's not like it's in a bubble.
Exactly. You can't ignore the global context. And trade relations will be a big factor, especially given Trump's history of protectionist policies. Basically, that means he often wants to protect American businesses and jobs, even if it means making it harder to trade with other countries. And then there's the whole question of how the U.S. dollar will do globally, especially with these potential changes to economic policy. It's complicated, to say the least.
It seems like there's a lot of uncertainty, both here in the U.S. and internationally. It's a lot to process.
Uncertainty is definitely the word of the day. And part of that comes from this whole non-consecutive second-term thing. It's like we're in uncharted waters here. There's no roadmap for this, so everyone's kind of figuring it out as we go along.
Which kind of brings us back to that whole social and political divide we were talking about. Are there any specific examples from our sources that really highlight those concerns?
Oh, yeah, definitely. There's one article here that's really striking. It talks about how misinformation is spreading and how hard it's becoming for people to tell what's true and what's not. And social media is playing a big role in that. It's creating these echo chambers where people only see stuff that reinforces what they already believe. It's like everyone's living in their own little world.
That's kind of scary, isn't it? It feels like it's getting harder and harder to have a real conversation with someone who has different views.
It's definitely a challenge, no doubt about it. But that's exactly why it's so important to be aware of what are going on and to make an effort to see things from different perspectives. We can't just stay in our own little bubbles and ignore everyone else.
I agree. It's about being willing to hear things that might make us uncomfortable, to challenge our own assumptions and biases. It's not always easy, but it's so important.
Exactly. Critical thinking isn't just about analyzing information. It's about being open to having our minds changed. It's about realizing that we don't have all the answers and that other people might have valid points, even if we don't agree with them right away.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've talked about the election, the potential impact on policy, and the worries about the social and political divide. But let's not forget about Trump himself. I mean, how could this second term, the one that wasn't right after the first one, how could that shape his legacy?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, it's safe to say that Trump is already one of the most unconventional and polarizing presidents in American history. And this second term, well, that's only going to add to that legacy.
It's almost like he gets to rewrite the rules of what it means to be a two-term president, right, May?
Yeah, you could say that. He has a chance to build on what he did in his first term and maybe even address some of the criticism he's faced. And of course, he's going to want to leave his mark on the country.
It's like a second act in a political drama, right? We're all on the edge of our seats waiting to see what happens next.
And I'm sure it'll be a dramatic performance, to say the least.
We're going to take a quick pause here, but we'll be back in a flash to wrap up our exploration of Trump's second term.
Okay, we're back for the final stretch of our deep dive. We talked about this comeback narrative earlier. How do you think Trump will actually try to make this comeback happen? Based on what we've seen from his campaign and his first term, I mean. Well, if you look at what he's done in the past, I think we can expect to see a lot of deregulation, especially in areas like energy and finance.
Okay, so less government intervention in those sectors.
Exactly. And I think he'll probably stick to his tough stance on immigration, too, both legal and illegal.
Right.
And as for foreign policy, well, I think he'll probably be even more assertive on the world stage, especially when it comes to countries like China and Iran.
So basically more of the same from his first term, but maybe even a bit more intense this time around?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. He's had 4 years to figure out what works and what doesn't, so I think he's coming back with a clearer vision of what he wants to do. And one thing's for sure, he's not afraid to shake things up or cause a little controversy.
It'll definitely be interesting to see how it all plays out. But hey, that's why we're here, right?
What, to cause controversy?
No. To help our listeners understand what's going on. It's a crazy world out there, and we're all in it together.
Absolutely. We're here to provide context, analyze things, and offer different perspectives so that hopefully people can make sense of it all. Because at the end of the day, that's what's important, right?
Yeah.
Understanding what's happening and how it affects us.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Okay, so today we talked about the election results, what this could mean for different policies, the social and political climate. We even touched on Trump's legacy. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with one last thought.
Okay, sure.
We've talked about the potential impacts of the second term, but what about the bigger picture? This whole situation, a second term, but not right after the first. It's never happened before. Could this change how we think about presidential power in the 21st century? Like what does it mean for a president's legacy?
Wow, that's a really interesting question. I mean, this is truly uncharted territory. There's no historical precedent for this kind of comeback. It really challenges how we traditionally think about the presidency. I think the next 4 years will be crucial for understanding what this means in the long term, not just for Trump, but for the office of the president itself.
It's like a giant social experiment, and we're all part of it.
I like that. It's true. We are, whether we want to be or not.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the implications of Trump's second term. It's been quite a ride, and I hope you've learned something along the way. Keep digging into the stuff we talked about, stay engaged, and most importantly, keep thinking critically. Thanks for listening.